O presidente Lula afirmou em sabatina na CNN americana que foi surpreendido pela ameaça tarifária de Donald Trump e chegou a pensar que a carta anunciando a taxa de 50% sobre as importações brasileiras era fake news. Segundo Lula, Trump não foi eleito para ser o imperador do mundo. Na entrevista exclusiva para a jornalista Cristiane Amanpour, Lula adotou uma postura diplomática nas respostas, ressaltando que a negociação é o melhor caminho para restabelecer a parceria histórica entre Brasil e Estados Unidos.
I want to ask you first, what does it feel like to be slapped with a 50% tariff by the United States, the world's biggest economy?
Well, Christian, for me, it was a surprise, not only the value of that tariff, but also how it was announced, the way it was announced. I think we're lacking a little bit of multilateralism on President Trump's mindset, and he knows that a problem of this sort, it is solved in a bargaining table, around the bargaining table. So what do we see? We were negotiating with the U.S. already for some months. My foreign affairs minister, the vice president of the Republic, which is also the Minister for Industry and Development and Commerce, were negotiating. And since March, we've sent a proposal to the U.S. government. After 10 meetings, we sent a proposal on May the 16th, saying what we wanted and what was a possible for us to reach an agreement. For our surprise, instead of a response to the letter that we sent, we received the news published in the President Trump's site. It was not a letter sent officially by diplomatic means. I think it was a mistake, a big mistake, because the letter that President Trump is full of things that are not true. First of all, the justice system in Brazil is independent. The president of the republic cannot interfere in the judicial branch of power. Second is that the trade deficit that is not true. The United States in the last 15 has a surplus of $410 billion vis-a-vis Brazil. And thirdly, if we're going to charge tax of big tax in Brazil, that's a problem of the Brazilian government. If we charge a high tax and they don't agree, we can establish a negotiation with the government. This is how the world works with multilateralism. That's how the world trade works and how Brazil acts. What we cannot have is a President Trump forgetting that he was elected to govern the U.S. He was elected not to be the emperor of the world. It would be much better to establish a negotiation first and then to reach the possible agreement, because we're two countries that we had very good meetings and we have good relations for 200 years. And so he's breaking away from any protocol, any liturgy that should exist between the relations between two heads of state. It was very unpleasant. We're trying to talk with people there, but we're also preparing ourselves to give an answer to that. What I've been saying publicly is that we will use all the words that exist in the dictionary in trying to negotiate. If we don't manage to reach an agreement, I can reassure you that we will go to the World Trade Organization, or we can gather a group of countries to respond, or we can use the reciprocity law that was passed, this bill by the National Congress. This is how it's going to work. I regret that two countries that have an historical relationship of 201 years prefer to be fighting through judicial means, because one president is not respecting the sovereignty of the other president.
Questionado sobre as críticas de Donald Trump ao julgamento de Jair Bolsonaro, Lula defendeu a independência do judiciário brasileiro. O presidente diz ter convicção de que o ex-presidente responde apenas por seus atos ligados à tentativa de golpe. Lula também diz ter convicção de que Bolsonaro será condenado e que Trump também seria, caso ele fosse julgado no Brasil pelas invasões ao Capitólio.
This is what President Trump said. This is nothing more or less than an attack on a political opponent, something I know much about. It happened to me 10 times. What's your response to that?
Well, my answer to that is that the judiciary branch of power in Brazil is independent. The president of the republic has no influence whatsoever with the Supreme Court, and the justices. The justices are approved by the Senate. They took office, and they have independence and they take care of our Constitution. Bolsonaro is on trial, not because he's an opponent, a political opposition. I won 3 elections in this country. It's important to remember that every election that I won, I lost 3 previous elections and won another. So we participated in 5 elections, and never before in this country someone would raise this issue to try to say or try to coup d'etat attempt like Bolsonaro did. No, he's not judged personally. He is being judged by the acts. He tried to organize a coup d'etat. He threatened secretly the death. He planned the death of Vice President, myself, and the Chief Justice. He could be on trial just for that. And the Attorney General denounced yesterday he will be convicted, and I believe in that. Christian, I'd like to say something to the American people. If Trump was Brazilian, and if he did what was happening at the Capitol Hill, he'd also be on trial in Brazil, and possibly and he would have violated the Constitution. So, according to the justices, he could also be arrested if he had done that here in Brazil. Well, first of all, it's not the President Lula that is charging Bolsonaro. It's the prosecutor's office and the Supreme Court is the one that will rule. It's important to remember, Christian, that I was put on trial with this same court, this same Supreme Court, that I lost 3 previous elections in this country, and I never raised any issue. I prepared myself for the next election if I lost one. He knew that he was going to lose the election. When I was in jail, the polls said that I would win the future election. Now he's saying that he was stealed, and then he tried on a coup d'etat, and then as a coward, he fled to the U.S. before my inauguration without handing over power. So this is a country that deserves respect, and President Trump has to respect the sovereignty of this country, the sovereignty of the Supreme Court, the sovereignty of the legislative body of power, the executive branch of power, as I respect U.S. sovereignty. It's important to remember that the super tariff will also create problems for the American consumer, for the American people, not only for the Brazilians. I'm going to try to solve the problems here in Brazil. We're talking with the business sectors, with the agricultural producers, with the fishermen, with the trade unions. We're going to find a solution, and we will give a response. Not by sight. We'll send an official letter through diplomatic letters from the President of the Republic of Brazil to President Trump to know that respect is something very good, and I like to show respect and I like to receive respect.
A jornalista pergunta a Lula como ele conseguirá sentar à mesa de negociações com Trump, considerando que ambos são de campos ideológicos opostos. Lula diz que vê Trump apenas como presidente dos Estados Unidos, não como alguém da extrema-direita. Além disso, Lula ressalta que ninguém quer romper relações diplomáticas e comerciais com os americanos, mas sim deixar de ser reféns da Casa Branca.
Christian, deixa eu te dizer.
Well, Christian, let me say to you something very bluntly. I'm not a progressive president. I am the president of Brazil. I don't see President Trump as a far-right president. I see him as the president of the U.S. He was elected by the American people. So it doesn't matter if I like him or not like him in terms of his ideology. What matters is that he's the president of the U.S. and I'm president of Brazil. And it's me and him. And so the best thing in the world is for us to sit around a table and talk. That would be the best thing in the world. But now he has demonstrated that he's not interested because he thinks he can do whatever he wants with the tariffs. The second issue is that no one who wants to break away from the U.S., no one wants to be free of the U.S. What we want is not to be a hostage of the U.S. We want freedom. We don't want to be a hostage of the U.S. We want freedom for the trade. And so it's important to remember that we represent 40% of the international trade in the world. And it's important to remember that we have 25% of the world GDP. And besides that, we have almost half of the world's population. And so we don't want to pick up a fight with anybody. The BRICS was not created to fight with any country. The BRICS was created so that we that consider ourselves equally discuss in a peaceful manner our issues. This is how we seek peace in Ukraine. That's how we sought peace in Gaza. That's how we want peace in the African continent, especially in Congo. Brazil does not want to feed any war or participate in war. Brazil wants peace and negotiate. It's important that the U.S. government should know that.
Okay, so I want to ask you whether you might feel any sympathy or have any advice for President Trump when it comes to President Putin. You've just talked about wanting peace in Ukraine, and you spoke to President Putin when you went to commemorate the end of World War II in Moscow just this year. You have suggested that you could mediate, but you have also seen that President Trump tried to talk sense to Putin, tried to look like, a negotiator and a mediator, and Putin has absolutely failed to respond. In fact, done the exact opposite, and Trump is getting very frustrated. You haven't had any success with Putin either in terms of ending this war. What advice do you have now to President Trump and to yourself and to anybody else who wants to try to end this bloody war?
I was very happy when President Trump said that he was going to negotiate with this war, the end of the war with Putin. I was happy with that. Although I have divergence with Trump, I was happy that President Trump was willing to stop the war. Now, this week, I heard that he's going to sell more arms. The world is very strange, Christian. The world has increased. The NATO countries increased in 5% of their GDP military spending to buy arms. And we have 733 million people that are dying of hunger. And others that don't have medical assistance, other millions don't have drinking water, and don't have basic sanitation. So all this money that is being carried to buy weapons should be carried to end poverty, extreme poverty in the world. And when the extreme poverty countries develop themselves, they can buy from the rich country. But not even this idea they can understand. So I believe that it would be important to understand there are no interlocutor to solve the peace issue. It's necessary that UN should take over the coordination. UN has to take the coordination, and Putin and Zelensky agree with that, to have a coordination of a group of countries that are friends that could develop an alternative proposal to what they want. Otherwise, this war will not have an end. And I hope sincerely that President Trump, instead of selling more weapons, he be more careful to try to reach peace. He has the strength, the force to do that. The same thing, I think, President Xi Jinping. He can be more active and more influential with Putin. So if you don't have interlocutors, the war will continue. It's like Gaza. What's going on in Gaza? Netanyahu doesn't show any respect for anybody. He doesn't respect the UN, the US. He doesn't respect anybody, anything. Netanyahu is now predestined to continuing government, and to continuing government, he needs to go to war. He has to kill a lot of children. This is the world that we want. Is this the world we want? The US is part of the UN Security Council. China is part of the UN Security Council. Russia is part of the UN of the Security Council. France and England. Where are they now? What are they doing? What is the UN Security Council doing now? And the full members of the UN Security Council, what are they doing? They don't solve anything. Who are they listening to? Who are they talking? Every day I read the newspaper. Someone asks for ceasefire, and the next day Netanyahu kills more women and children there. And now he's just killed children that were trying to seeking for food and not for weapons. Where is the world governance that has to intervene? We need a world governance that should be done by the 5 permanent members of the UN Security Council. All these 5 countries, they have weapons, nuclear weapons, and all of them are involved in wars. And the US invaded Iraq without consulting the UN. France and England invaded Libya without consulting the UN. And Putin invaded Ukraine without consulting the UN. And the Gaza war, there's no consultation with the UN either. So, Christiane, we're lacking world governance. We're lacking global governance. I think that the 5 permanent members of the UN Security Council should gather and say, we have to change the UN Security Council because we're not having the competence to solve the issues. Let's have another governance. And then we have to have representation from Latin America, from Asia, from the Middle East. And Germany, Japan has to join the UN Security Council. Let's change. Let's change to see if we can establish at least hope that the world will have more peace than war.